The desert stretched endless and golden under the afternoon sun, wind combing through the tall grass like a whisper from the spirits. Dust clung to every step of Ethan Cole's boots as he guided his horse toward the distant hills, his canteen nearly dry and his hope even thinner. He'd been riding for days, scouting new grazing land after the spring floods had drowned half his ranch. By the third sunrise, the land itself began to look alive, strange shapes moving across the heat shimmer. It was near the edge of a dry creek when he saw them. 3 tall figures, broad-shouldered and graceful as mountain statues. Apache women, their braids long as ropes, their faces painted in crimson clay. They were working beside a crumbled adobe hut, carrying water barrels with the strength of oxen. Ethan slowed his horse, unsure whether to turn or greet them, but one of them looked up, her gaze sharp as a hawk's. She was the tallest among them, taller even than most men he'd ever met. Her eyes, dark and endless, fixed on him. "You're far from white man's road," she said, voice steady but not unkind. Her English was thick with accent, but her tone carried power. The other 2 sisters stopped their work and stared, cautious. Ethan removed his hat, sweat dripping down his temples. "Just looking for water," he said, his voice raspy. "Didn't mean to trespass." For a moment no one spoke. The wind stirred, lifting dust into a thin veil between them. Then the tall woman nodded toward the old well behind the hut. "The land belongs to no one today," she said. "Drink." Ethan slid off his horse, leading it gently to the well. The bucket creaked as he lowered it, the cool splash below sounding like salvation. When he turned, he found the woman watching him closely, not with suspicion now, but curiosity. Her presence was commanding, every movement heavy with calm confidence. "You're alone," she said after a moment. "No wife, no sons." He nodded, a little startled. "How'd you know?" "Your eyes," she replied simply. "They look like the sky, wide, empty." Then, with a faint half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, she added, "I haven't spoken to a man in 6 months." The words struck him still, not with scandal, but with a kind of sadness. He could see it now, the isolation in her tone, the solitude carved into her posture. The Apache had been pushed far into the desert after the wars. These 3 sisters had built a home from nothing, surviving off what little the earth gave. Ethan wanted to say something, maybe an apology, maybe a simple kindness. But before he could, a deep voice called from inside the hut. One of the other sisters appeared, carrying a bundle of herbs and animal hides. The tall woman turned to her, exchanged a few soft words in Apache, then looked back at him. "You may stay until the sun sleeps," she said. "Then you ride." Ethan nodded, grateful but uneasy. He felt as though he had stepped into a place untouched by time, where kindness was given not out of trust, but old tradition. As the hours passed, he helped them mend a fence, patch the roof, fetch water. The women spoke little, but their movements were like a rhythm, strong, silent, sure. When the day began to cool, the tall sister sat by the fire, eyes on the horizon. Ethan joined her, uncertain. She didn't look at him at first, just said quietly, "Men took everything from us. My people, my home, my husband." Then she looked up and her eyes caught the last rays of the setting sun. "But the earth still listens. It still gives when you treat it right." Ethan couldn't look away. There was no hate in her voice, only strength, a kind he'd never known. In that moment, he understood she wasn't speaking just of the land, but of her heart. And before the stars rose, he realized he'd found something he hadn't even known he was searching for, a place where silence spoke louder than words, and where a lonely man and a lonely woman might finally begin to heal. Morning came with a golden hush over the desert. The first sunlight spilled across the cracked clay ground, and Ethan woke to the scent of smoke and fresh cornbread. The Apache sisters were already working, one tending the small fire, one feeding a tethered mule, and the tallest, the one who'd spoken to him yesterday, standing near the well with her braid lifted by the breeze. For a moment he just watched her, the way the light caught the copper sheen of her skin, the strength in her stillness. When she noticed him, she didn't smile, but her gaze softened. "You're still here," she said. He nodded, brushing dust off his shirt. You said I could stay until the sun slept. It hasn't yet. Her lips curved just slightly. Then eat. The bread was rough but warm, the water cold and pure. The younger sisters spoke softly in Apache as they worked, their laughter like birdsong, cautious but curious toward the stranger. The tall one stayed quiet until the chores were done. Then she motioned for him to follow her beyond the hut. They walked through the tall grass until they reached a small field, freshly turned soil waiting for seeds. We plant here, she said. But the rains forgot us this year. Ethan knelt, running a hand through the dry earth. You could use irrigation from the creek bed. If you dig a trench along the ridge, you could bring the water closer. She studied him. You know land? He nodded. All I've ever known. My father was a farmer before the wars. I learned to listen to dirt the way other men listened to guns. For the first time, she smiled. A real one this time, faint but bright like sunrise after a storm. Then you listen with us. They spent the next hours digging side by side, turning soil and building small channels from the creek. Sweat gleamed on their skin, the air thick with heat, but neither complained. The earth began to breathe again, a promise of life returning. When they stopped, she offered him a drink from her clay jug. Their hands brushed briefly, and he felt something spark, not passion but connection, deep and ancient as the land itself. She finally told him her name, Nayeli, meaning I love you in her mother tongue. He didn't dare speak it aloud at first, afraid to break its meaning. She told him how her people had scattered after soldiers burned their village, how she and her sisters had fled into the desert, building a life from scraps and stubborn hope. We are all that's left of our family, she said quietly. The desert made us strong, but it made us lonely too. Ethan listened without interruption. When she finished, he said softly, Maybe the desert didn't forget you. Maybe it's waiting for someone to help it bloom again. Nayeli looked at him long, her eyes shining with a light that was both sorrow and gratitude. And what do you wait for, rancher? He hesitated. Maybe the same thing. By noon, the creek water began trickling through their handmade trenches, shimmering like silver veins under the sun. The youngest sister shouted with joy, dancing barefoot through the mud. Nayeli watched them, then turned to Ethan. You brought the water, she said, almost to herself. No man has done that for us. Ethan tipped his hat, embarrassed. Just a bit of digging, but she shook her head. No, you listened. When the sun began to dip, he saddled his horse, ready to leave. Nayeli stood beside him, the wind tugging her braid. You'll return, she said, not as a question but a statement. He smiled faintly. If the land allows, she nodded once. Then it will. As he rode away, he looked back once, the three sisters standing together in the bright light, their land glistening with the first shimmer of life. The sight burned itself into his memory, stronger than any frontier sunset. He didn't yet know that what he'd left behind wasn't just a piece of desert. It was the beginning of something sacred, something that would soon test his loyalty, his heart, and the fragile bridge between two worlds that both longed to heal.